Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Why Everyone Plays. It's been a very long time since the last one because I spent most of my time making Why No One Plays. That is the more popular series of the two, but I want to make sure I keep up with this one, so let's return with the bane of every Riven main's existence ever since the day he was conceived. Renekton, the Butcher of the Sands. This is arguably going to be my favorite episode in the series since I play Renekton a lot, and it's interesting how he and his brother Nasus are opposites not only in terms of playstyle, but even opposites in popularity. I did feature the latter before in Why No One Plays, so it's pretty funny that the former is in Why Everyone Plays, but let's get started. Among most popular picks in top lane, Renekton is a relatively stable and secure presence, and that's how he's been ever since like Season 5, when Riot started working on fully establishing subclasses such as mages and fighters and whatnot. We've seen all different kinds of champions from Riven to Darius to Malphite to Urgot to Fiora to Mordekaiser, pretty much everyone at one point or another, go from super picker WNOP to practically worthless, and that's typically because Riot would buff those champions and subsequently nerf them right after. Through all that, Renekton stood in sort of the same spot, not receiving any major buffs or nerfs and only giving him some quality of life changes as the game continued to grow. Everyone who plays in the top lane respects Renekton for his strengths, but no one really considers him a tiresome matchup versus other contenders like Camille and Fiora. All in all, public opinion on Mr. Crocodile is pretty much in the middle, and that's exactly why so many people like to play him. Renekton is sort of the poster child of the early game fighters. He's a very self-sufficient champion with all the necessary tools to be a lane bully, and a terrifying mid-game threat who tapers off a little past the 30-minute mark due to his linear scaling. All early game champions share the same qualities to some extent: high base damage, easily applicable crowd control, effective mobility, and most importantly, a quick and easy bread and butter combo. You don't need to have all these attributes to be considered a strong early game champion, as someone like Lee Sin lacks any form of hard crowd control pre-6, but basically if you can check more than half of those boxes, you're set to go. Renekton excels in all of them and then some, which is why for the past 5 or so years, he's been able to hold a big chunk of the market share in top lane. And if you ask any top laner worth their salt, they'd likely vouch for him as a very solid champion to add to your pool. Reason being, Renekton is extremely consistent. He isn't dependent on external factors that might skew his performance. For the most part, wherever you are on the map, whatever the situation, Renekton can do his job and do it well. Top lane is all about moves and counter moves, seeing as usually it's a 1v1 lane unless the junglers decide to camp. As a result, players gravitate towards champions that are fully self-sufficient and can hold their own in head-to-head combat. First thing about him is his matchup spread. Against most top laners, Renekton either goes even or wins, making him a somewhat safe blind pick in a lane focused on counter picks. The only champions that really give him a hard time are ranged top lane cheesers like Quinn, Cannon, Gnar, things like that, since they obviously exploit Renekton's close range. Although that is shared among almost all melee champions anyway. The thing is, even in those matchups, Renekton can completely turn them around once he gets his ultimate. So overall, there are very few if any -2 matchups on him, since any champion that does give him a hard time like a -1 can usually become easier after you gain your ultimate. Aside from having very simple but effective trade combos and all-ins, one of Renekton's best strengths is his lane endurance. Lane endurance is essentially a champion's ability to stay in lane for long periods of time without having to back, the two most common reasons being they're either low on health or low on mana. Thanks to Call the Meek, Renekton has a small but reliable way to keep himself from getting too dangerously low, as it can be used to push waves, harass your lane opponent, and get some health all at the same time. Moreover, he's a manaless champion, so he isn't bogged down by resource management the way some other champions might be, like Darius, Fiora, and Camille. Secondly, his attack patterns require no setup or conditions aside from fury management. While other champions have to micromanage some aspect of their kit, Renekton is free to engage whenever he wants since his Q, W, E, and ultimate all have immediate effects. Now just to clarify, fury management is a very important part of Renekton's playstyle, and you can usually tell if the enemy Renekton knows what they're doing or not based on how they use their empowered abilities. But the concepts remain the same. Empowered abilities simply make him hurt a lot more, but they don't fundamentally change the application of said abilities. He has a low skill floor but rewards players based on the time they invest on him. It makes him a favorable pick since you get out what you put in, which contributes to player satisfaction. Speaking of satisfaction, comeback mechanics are highly desired since it forces your opponent to fully commit to finishing the job. Because if they don't, and you survive with even a sliver of health, you can turn around and myrtleize the living daylights out of the enemy team. Generally speaking, champions become less threatening when at lower health because, when close to dying, most players prioritize self-preservation at that point, defaulting to retreating or defensive play to stay alive. Conversely, players tend to deprioritize and underestimate low health targets because of that usual mindset, especially in solo queue where overconfidence and arrogance run rampant. A lot of players take a defeat for granted when they're sitting at full health and you're one hit away from death. More often than not, that leads to Renekton making a lot of clutch 1v3, 1v2 outplays because they don't realize it's not his health bar he cares about, but yours. Much like Tryndamere and Olaf, Renekton is one of those champions where if you want to take him down, you have to shoot him twice to make sure he's really dead. There's nothing more satisfying than instantly turning a losing situation around, and Renekton is an expert at that since he's deceptively hard to kill. Dominus provides Renekton 250 to 750 bonus health, the highest HP boost in the game at max level. The supplemental health allows you to survive what would have been an otherwise fatal blow. And because you gain 50% more Fury under half health, combined with the Fury regeneration from your ultimate, you can easily unleash all 3 empowered abilities in a single rotation. Each of Renekton's basic abilities have very high base numbers. Q does 300 damage with 120 bonus AD ratio, in the mid game that means around 500 plus damage. W has 135 plus 225% total AD, which can be 700 to 800. Slice and Dice combined are 410 plus another 225% bonus AD. If you combine all of this plus the new Goredrinker, Renekton can dish out upwards of 2000 damage to a single target in the span of under 2 seconds. That's assassin levels of burst. The stun not only guarantees you'll land everything, but the stun target has to sit there and face tank it, which usually they can't. The armor shred on Slice and Dice is generally enough to beat down most tanks like Ornn, Malphite Cho'Gath and such, and you can heal up to 600 health with a single Q. Easy to do if you're in the middle of the enemy team. Renekton might lack the flashy outplay combos of a Yasuo, Kai'Sa, or Riven, but he still does a fantastic job. No doubt you've chased after a low health Renekton only for him to flash and delete you without being able to do anything. There are a lot of champions with burst combos, but very few in this day and age with a point and click stun. Renekton is probably the only person who can hack you to pieces the way he can. So you have a champion who is not only naturally stronger than about 3/4 of the cast in top lane, but he gets even stronger at low health, which can be used to punish those who don't know what Renekton does. The third point is that Renekton can press his lead extremely well, even small ones, complemented by the fact that he's able to get that lead really easily since he's able to punish the smallest of misplays by his lane opponent. Even better for him, Renekton is one of the strongest champions in the mid game, which is around level 9 to 14. Very few champions, if any at all, can match the extent of his pressure in both a 1v1 and teamfight, with the exception of champions specifically built to thrive in duels like Jax or Tryndamere. But even then, a good Renekton can effectively just smash them into the ground by brute forcing his way through all their attacks because he can heal a lot and gain a huge amount of health. For many champions in Why No One Plays, I talk about how if given the opportunity or with some help early game from the jungler, they can carry really well. For example, Kindred, Azir, Anivia before her buffs in Season 11, Shyvana, even his older brother Nasus. These champions are all able to solo 1v9 games if they get fed enough. The problem is the likelihood of that happening. Having a good start or getting an early lead is so low that their hypercarry potential isn't able to be considered a positive because it doesn't happen enough to be consistent. Champions in Why Everyone Plays are popular for that specific reason. They not only can carry games really well, but they can get to a point where they start 1v9ing either much earlier or much easier than most champions in Why No One Plays. Renekton is a paragon of that example. He has one of the best mid games in League of Legends. He can get to that mid game really easily with even a small advantage, and he can get that small advantage really easily because he's also a lane bully. One strength begets another strength, which begets another strength. There are only a select few combinations of champions that can shut him down, such as long-range high-peel comps like Lulu and Syndra, who can prevent him from exercising his power. But if the enemy team lacks someone capable of protecting their allies from him, he can snowball all over them with very little they can do to respond. Other lane bullies in the top lane have a weakness that can still be exploited even if they're fed. Darius may be strong, but he's still easily kiteable due to having no dashes, and while Strikebreaker has helped circumvent that a little bit, the weakness is still there. Pantheon does have the mobility and roaming potential, but since he lacks a combat ultimate and his DPS is somewhat low, he can struggle against duelists even if he has more kills. Jace can go both melee and range, having high burst and equally good long range poke, but he can be quite vulnerable if you survive his full combo and close the distance on him because of his low defense and high cooldowns. Renekton, on the other hand, doesn't have a significant weakness that can be used to his opponent's advantage, aside from very specific team compositions designed to protect their carries, such as Ivern jungle, Lulu support, or Karma top Seraphine mid. But those champion combinations counter Jace, Pantheon, and Darius just as much as they counter Renekton, making it not a weakness exclusive to him. The only deficiency that he unconditionally suffers from is that, like all early game champions, he falls off as time goes on. Renekton can only scale in one way, attack damage. Moreover, that attack damage only applies linearly. Since he doesn't get much benefit from building tank items aside from the durability they provide, he doesn't get the same kind of return on investment the way late game champions do. Two easy ways to tell if a champion scales really well: if they have another aspect of their kit aside from flat damage that gets stronger, or if that aspect can scale in multiple ways. Let's look at Malphite. Malphite is a tank, and tanks normally build armor to increase their durability in a fight. But for him, that armor also strengthens his W and E. In other words, he deals more damage while simultaneously getting harder to kill. An example of alternative scaling would be Ryze. Ryze's damage goes up by building ability power just like any other mage, but he also can scale off of bonus mana, so he scales in two different ways. Of course, those are not the only two examples of a late game scaling champion, but those are some examples. Renekton obviously has neither, and so he starts to struggle keeping pace with those champions by the time everyone reaches their 5th or so item, which is usually around the 30 to 35 minute mark. An easy solution would just be to turtle up until you outscale him, right? Technically yes, except stalling until everyone reaches full build is a lot harder to pull off now than it was back in the old days of League of Legends. Average game time is under 30 minutes, which means most champions are on 4 completed items or so when either team's nexus explodes. Renekton's greatest weakness is naturally being phased out because games end much faster. That's also the reason why early game champions are thriving so much for the past few seasons, like Pantheon, Hecarim, Katarina, Pyke, and Yone, because they only need boots and 2 or 3 completed items to start dominating around the map. By then, they can snowball hard enough to where falling off in the late game is a moot point because the game will be over by then. All in all, it's a combination of his own merits and changes to the game that indirectly benefit him that make him such a strong and consistent pick. It's the reason he's become such a contested presence in pro play during Season 10 and so far in 11, because he's such a reliable champion who can put in a lot of work with very little. And games end much faster than they used to, so he doesn't really fall off. Now, I'm not saying Renekton is super invincible no counterplay. If he falls behind early on, he can be rendered practically useless for the rest of the game. And in a similar fashion to Darius, he is only as strong as his lane opponent is willing to let him be. If you play Renekton against someone who knows how to deal with him, you might not have any chance to build a lead since they can play extremely safe. It's also why he's only really a viable one-trick up until around, I would say, mid to high diamond, because once you reach Master, Grandmaster, and Challenger tier, it starts to get a little harder to solo main him since the average player up there knows his strengths and weaknesses as well as the Renekton player does. I'm not saying he's completely unviable. We have players like Romanium who make him work, but champions like Camille, Irelia, Fiora, and Riven are way more consistent in high elo, whereas Renekton is usually reserved as a counterpick. I think that's a good spot to end the video. I don't spam Renekton as much as I used to since I'm currently loving the changes to Pantheon ever since they brought him back to solo lanes and out of support, but Renekton will always be a comfort food champion to me, someone I can always count on when I want to crush every Riven one-trick that comes my way. If you enjoyed this video, a rating would be much appreciated, and if you'd like to see more content like this, please be sure to subscribe and check out the video description down below for links to my Discord and social media, as well as playlists containing all my past episodes of Why No One Plays and Why Everyone Plays if you feel like binge watching. But for now, that's it for today. Thank you all so much for watching this episode, and I'll see you again soon for the next one. Take care.